It is very important to have all these elements of a city that makes a city a place. One simple way to say what urban design does, not just about the design of the physical elements, but it's also how people use it, how it comes to life, how the different uses interact, and how people appreciate.
Parks are no longer going to be the traditional parks, not just infrastructure, but culture as well. Let the flexibility happen, let it evolve, and we'll see where it takes us. Learn from it, improve on it, and go back and just learn your lessons, right? City building is not a one-time thing, it's a continual thing.
Markham's park system is to meet the needs of such a diverse community, distribute parkland equitably across all wards from an access perspective, make them safe, make them sustainable from an environmental, financial, and cultural perspective. These 4 parks, a lot of them are quite similar in terms of their classification. All of them are what would be considered active parks in that they have sporting facilities in them. Milliken Mills is one of the true community parks of the 4, greater than 6 hectares in size, very flat and programmable. It's co-located with a community center. You can do tournaments with baseball, tournaments with soccer.
Provide as many connections, visual and physical, around the park and to the park. So as many street frontages as possible, as little backyarding as possible. The connection to other greenway systems, other ecological features. In the example of maybe Denison or Armadale, even if you're living right next to the park, you may have to walk around the block to get to it. That's not encourage walkability.
These parks, because they're more of an urban format, will be widely used because they're accessible. Critical mass can enable the use of those parks. Whereas before, a swath of land in a traditional suburb on 50-foot lots could probably accommodate maybe 200 houses, whereas a single building would be 200 units.
Sometimes I wonder where this whole work from home, COVID environment is taking us. Could we count some of the apartment units as offices? That brings in the daytime population, creates a critical mass. Markham was a town until a few years ago when it became a city. You can see how it has evolved from lower density, more suburban communities, to highly dense urban environment. It's a city that is going through a lot of changes. I see this in North American planning in general. Parks are larger spaces, more green. They meet that environmental role or serve that environmental function. They help with stormwater management. They help protect species.
One of the key principles when designing parks, the first layers are safety. At an equal level, we look at accessibility, and not just physical accessibility, but visual. Once we know those layers are set, we then start bringing in the design element, the things that will really create interest for a community, things that will draw children and families to the park. Planting, I've been known to call it lipstick. It's very important, but it does fall into that greater structural network that's safe and accessible. We consider from a planting perspective, certainly as native material, allows it to be hardy, survive the seasons with not much maintenance.
We need to embrace diversity. We are very much a diverse community, not just racially, but needs. One of the things that I'm focused on as well is the elderly. Sensory parks. It's not just about the little kids playing on the swing. It's about the elderly going out, exploring in a safe park where they will not get lost. They can get inspired. Parks need to educate. It's just not about the park itself. It's about where it's adjacent to. Learn about the environment. Learn about the aquatic animals, the fauna. It needs to be specific to an area.
Soccer fields and baseball fields are land intensive, but very important to growing communities. This is one of a number of tools in the toolbox to try to find efficiencies from a land perspective. The Milliken Mills soccer fields is an exercise in efficiencies. So the City of Toronto has some reservoirs in Markham, and rather than determining those lands above unusable, we are able to locate things. Sports fields don't have any necessity to build down with things like foundations nor trees, where it is a complementary use where we can locate fields on top of infrastructure such as reservoirs.
Jane Jacobs famously talked about eyes on the street. And that really works with parks as well, because when these users face on to the park, there is a sense of safety, sense of security that comes with it, and it becomes more attractive.
Some of the older parks, parkland was looked at sort of what's the remnant land after we developed the hard structures and the milfoil. Whereas now we do put, right from the planning stages, we're looking for lands that are very visible to the community, improve that public realm.
Ada Mackenzie's planning, almost purposeful, where you have these units facing onto the park. You create that opportunity by just orienting buildings towards a park.
Historically, it might have been playground, splash pad, baseball, soccer. We now have trails as walking opportunities, off-leash dog areas, pickleball, and a number of emerging recreations that are all competing for the same land.
When I purchased those lands around Ada Mackenzie, those lands were very much underutilized. You had the office components, you had the towers going in, you had the makings of a park, and you had townhouses that were surrounding that park. Because it was isolated, it's straddled by 407 and Highway 7, it was isolated. But over time, we saw the neighborhood grow, families move in, using the parks that were emerging at that point. That's our home. And that was because we had neighbors, they were close-knit, we all got along, to the most part, and we enjoyed the services together. We created this neighborhood niche so we can watch over each other.
Denison and Armadale are very similar. And what those are intended to do is meet the needs of a 5-minute catchment area for the residents.
Even though it's on a public street, it's tucked away. It's the nature of how Denison was created. It funnels traffic through a traffic sewer in that sense.
There are other aspects that we consider in urban design. So when you plan for an urban densification area, we make sure that the type of build form is conducive to a positive microclimate within the park. When we approve a tower next to a park, we want to make sure wind impact is minimized, shadow impact is minimized, and it's really a comfortable space for everybody to use.
Now, these days, we have the subway, GO, we have York Region Transits. But not only that, as you get into the micro-mobility of neighborhoods, you have trail systems. With emerging technology, you have e-scooters, e-bikes, bicycle trails, bicycle lanes. You get more into the granular, now you have walking. You need to make that convenient for them in order for them to have that choice not to use a car. But as you know, over time, over decades, we as humans know how to occupy and use that space for other things that were never intended originally. And that's how spaces and urban areas naturally and organically grow. And I think when that happens and it's not forced, these urban areas are successful. If you let the community evolve, that's when you're going to get the stability, that's when you're going to get that real sense of space.
Parks certainly play a role. People go to parks and people go to art, and there's a natural relationship between the two. Not every park is a good candidate for public art. It could be for a certain type, performance style, but not likely the permanent collection.
Public art, for me, is quite important as part of these public spaces. It triggers memories. It talks about the past history, current. It talks about where we came from, who we want to be. It's inspiring. Milliken Mills Park, there is a hill, there's a reservoir that peaks over Markham to the north and west. During the wintertime, we toboggan, which brings the four seasons into some of these parks. If you live in stacked townhouses with no backyard, if I want to plant tomatoes, what am I going to do? These urban agricultural areas, these community gardens, would enable the residents to grow whatever they want to grow, trade, share, chat, and get to know your neighbors.
As Markham develops into these urban areas, I really see a lot of value in creating those small spaces that are enjoyable to adults and children alike. If I go to a park today, it's very intentional. I'm going for a walk, I'm going to exercise, or I'm taking my child who's playing in the park. Whereas these little spaces, they are unintentional finds. That's the variety that I think mature cities offer and mature urban environments offer.
It's not necessarily all about large land for parks. It's about the quality of the park. How fantastic is it to see a group of people doing Tai Chi, doing line dancing, and playing basketball with kids at a park by a water park area as well. It's just fascinating to me.